conflict in the Sudan has taken a dangerous turn. A biolab is caught in the crossfire. We are talking about the National Public Health Laboratory. Experts call it a potential germ bomb. That's because this lab has disease samples. It stores pathogens related to measles and cholera. This lab is situated in Khartoum, the capital of Sudan. Most of the fighting is happening here. The city has turned into a war zone and the World Health Organization is worried. The WHO has raised an alarm. Now, it's not clear which group controls the lab, but it is caught in the conflict. As of this afternoon, lab technicians were not being allowed to go inside. There have been power cuts at the facility, and this could be very dangerous. The ceasefire is still in place, but it's being only partially observed. Countries are racing to get their citizens out, and this includes India. The ceasefire was supposed to last for 3 days. 2 days are already gone. 1 is left. It may not be enough time to secure the biolab in Khartoum. And the last thing the world wants is a mishap in such a laboratory. The last time a lab was compromised, it most likely triggered a global pandemic. The Khartoum lab is different from the Wuhan lab, but this too has sensitive material. There is serious risk of a biohazard. A WHO representative believed to be in the country has released this warning through a voice message.
So with the electricity shut down and with no technician taking care of all these, the risk of biological hazard is high in Khartoum because of the occupations of the lab by one of the fighting parties. It is not really necessary to say which party.
The risk is high. That is the WHO's assessment. And you don't really need an expert to tell you that. It's evident. You can't leave dangerous substances unsecured in the middle of a war, especially in a city like Khartoum. Look at where the lab is situated. Right in the heart of Khartoum, it is surrounded by critical infrastructure. The city's main airport is nearby, also Sudan's military headquarters. It is dangerously close to the lab. And a lot of the fighting is happening here. At least 14 health facilities have already been attacked, and now this lab is at risk. Quick background. Sudan is in northeast Africa, and it has a history of instability. In 2019, there were mass protests in the country. It led to the ouster of Omar al-Bashir, the man who ruled the country for 30 years. In 2021, there was a coup, and since then, the Sudan is being ruled by a council of generals. 2 military men were in charge. General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan, the head of Sudan's armed forces and the de facto president, and his deputy, General Mohammed Hamdan Dagalo, also known as Hemeti. He leads a paramilitary group called the RSF, the Rapid Support Forces. Now, these 2 men are fighting for power. The de facto president and his deputy, they're at odds, they're fighting, they're using their troops to settle the power struggle. The battle is between the Sudan's armed forces and the RSF. It started almost 2 weeks ago, and it looks nowhere close to the end. Forget about ending the war. Neither side is willing to agree to a permanent ceasefire. In fact, the 3-day pause is on shaky ground. It is, like I said, only being partially observed. Locals say they can hear sounds of gunfire and that fighter jets are still thundering in the skies. Now, the risk of a biological disaster has heightened tensions.
Technicians no longer have access to their laboratory, which means the lab is no longer able to perform its normal diagnostic and reference function. We're also concerned that those occupying the lab could be accidentally exposed to pathogens stored there. WHO is seeking more information and conducting a risk assessment. Power cuts are also threatening to make the few remaining stocks of blood stored in the central blood bank unusable.
So basically, everything can go wrong is going wrong, which is why countries are speeding up evacuations. At least 50 countries are pulling out their citizens, and India is one of them. New Delhi launched Operation Kaveri this week. Close to 3,000 Indians were stranded. They're being brought to safety. As of this afternoon, over 500 Indians have been evacuated. 278 were brought back via INS Sumedha, which is an Indian Navy ship. It had docked at Port Sudan to bring back Indians. India had also deployed 2 aircraft for evacuations. These are the Super Hercules aircraft. They've been used in a variety of missions in the past, from sending humanitarian aid to natural disaster support and search and rescue missions. The aircraft rescued 256 Indians. And in the days ahead, more people are expected to return home. But a lot depends on whether the ceasefire holds and if it can be extended. For most of us, hosting a neighbor is easy. They're familiar faces, they live right next door, and they don't overstay at parties. Not for India, I'm afraid. Hosting neighbors is a tough task for New Delhi, and this week is a big party. The SCO defense ministers will be meeting on the 27th and 28th of April. SCO is the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, and India is the SCO chair this year. It's always been an awkward platform or forum for India. On the one hand, the SCO is headquartered in China. It even bears the name of a Chinese city, Shanghai Cooperation Organization. At the same time, it's become India's window to Eurasia, and we'll discuss that later. First, let's focus on our neighbors. China's defense minister will be attending the meeting. General Li Shangfu will also hold talks with India's defense minister Rajnath Singh, and that bilateral is scheduled for Thursday. It's important for a number of reasons. Number one, the defense ministers have not held talks since the Galwan clashes, so it's been 3 years. The foreign ministers have met multiple times, but the defense ministers have not. And reason number two why this is important. The background of this meeting. It follows the 18th round of core commander talks between India and China. These talks started after the Galwan clashes in 2020. There has been some breakthrough, but complete disengagement has not been achieved. Interestingly, there was no joint statement after the 18th round. India released its own statement. China released their own. Both sides called the talks frank, candid, and open. Nice adjectives, but in the end, there was no breakthrough. The solution in Ladakh can only be political. So the question is, how serious are the Chinese? Do they want a solution, or do they want to keep the border alive? There have been some encouraging signs recently. Like the Global Buddhist Summit last week, the Dalai Lama attended the event in New Delhi. We told you about it. He even made a speech. But there wasn't the usual outrage from Beijing. The state media blew a fuse. But the Chinese government did not say very much about this event. Does that signify political rationalism? Honestly, it's hard to say. But as always, the expectations are at rock bottom. Next, let's talk about our other hostile neighbor, Pakistan. Their defense minister will not be traveling to New Delhi. Instead, he will join virtually. Now, quick side note, there is an SCO Foreign Ministers Summit happening next week. And for that, Pakistan is coming. Foreign Minister Bilawal Bhutto Zardari will be flying down to Goa. And the obvious question is this: will he hold bilateral talks with S. Jaishankar, India's foreign minister? From all accounts, no. Jaishankar was asked about this possibility on Wednesday, and he said terror and talks cannot go hand in hand. Listen to this.
It is for us very difficult to engage with a neighbor who practices cross-border terrorism against us. We have always said that they have to deliver on their commitment not to encourage, sponsor, and carry out cross-border terrorism. We continue to hope that one day we would reach that stage.
So the message from New Delhi is quite clear. Stop sponsoring terrorism, then we can sit down for talks. But Pakistan isn't showing any willingness. Just last week, there was a terror attack in Jammu and Kashmir's Poonch. 5 soldiers were killed. Intelligence agencies have not ruled out a Pakistani hand. Such incidents make engagement impossible. You cannot sponsor terrorism and hold talks simultaneously. So what should we make of Bhutto's visit? He himself downplayed it on Pakistani television. Bhutto said, "Don't look at this as a bilateral visit. It's part of the SCO charter, hence I'm going." I know I said expectations from China are rock bottom, but from Pakistan, it's even below that. And that's the problem for the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. You see, the SCO hopes to create a strong regional order, a Eurasian order. But the internal dynamics are problematic. New Delhi and Islamabad have problems. New Delhi and Beijing have problems. Earlier, Russia was the calming influence that kept India interested, but after Ukraine, this isn't the same Russia. So India's broader engagement in the SCO will have to be re-evaluated. Yes, it's a bridge to Central Asia. Yes, it can create a Eurasian order, but only if it remains firmly multilateral, not if it becomes China plus. And speaking of leaders unfit for office, Turkey's Recep Tayyip Erdogan is up for re-election. His policies alone should be enough to disqualify him, but now there are health concerns too. Let me tell you what happened. On Tuesday, Erdogan sat down for a live TV interview. It was already 90 minutes behind schedule, 10 minutes into the show. Erdogan got up and left. You can see the puzzled look on the face of the journalist. But the rest of it happened off camera. Around 15 minutes later, Erdogan returned. Apparently, he had a stomach bug. Listen to this.
Dün, bugün yoğun.
We had intense election campaign work yesterday and today. And during these works, I had a serious stomach flu.
Midemi ciddi manada üşütmüşüm.
Whatever the reason, he called off the interview. He also skipped 3 rallies today. So there is speculation about Erdogan's health. Could he be unfit for office? Such rumors aren't new. Erdogan's health has always been a mystery. Officially, here's what we know. He's 69 years old. He had an intestine surgery in 2011. And other than that, he's in top shape. But unofficially, there are multiple concerns. Some say Erdogan has Parkinson's disease. Others say he had cancer. Such rumors have gained traction because of 2 reasons. One is all the unnecessary secrecy. You see, rumors are like a rebellious teenager. The more you restrict it, the more it wants to break out. Erdogan has used the police to crack down on information about his health. And such tactics have obviously backfired. So that's one factor. The second one is the camera curse. Photographers have snapped Erdogan sleeping at official events. I'm talking about summits and joint briefings. Such pictures do not help his cause. But let's keep the health aside for a moment. Let's focus on the politics. What are Erdogan's chances in the elections next month? Not that good. He's been ruling Turkey for almost 20 years, so anti-incumbency is massive. Plus, he faces a united opposition. 6 parties have come together to nominate one candidate. This man, Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu. He's a former civil servant. He's also soft-spoken, unassuming and studious. Not exactly ideal leadership material. So why is he leading the polls? Because he's also non-controversial. The Turkish people have already tried out the right-wing demigod. They got 85% inflation in return. So now they want some sanity in the president's office. Enter Kılıçdaroğlu. They call him the Turkish Gandhi. It has nothing to do with India. They call him that because of his physical stature. His party traces its roots to Turkey's founder, Kemal Atatürk. He's also considered close to the secular army. Simply put, he's the ideological opposite of President Erdogan. Opinion polls show him leading, but it's a slender lead. Most experts are predicting around 2. But all these polls and analysis are based on one assumption, that the elections will be fair. Now, Erdogan is not a typical democratic leader. He may walk out of an interview, but he won't walk out of power, not without putting up a fight. Reports say the Kurdish vote is expected to play a big role in this election. They are the largest ethnic minority in Turkey, the Kurds. Their total size is around 20% of the population. Now, most Kurds live in eastern and southeastern Turkey. If things are close, the Kurds could be the kingmakers. So who are they supporting? Well, nobody on paper. The pro-Kurdish parties have not nominated a presidential candidate, and by doing so, they have boosted Kılıçdaroğlu's chances, sort of like outside support, undeclared. So guess what Erdogan is doing in response? He's rounding up the Kurds. At least 126 people have been arrested across Turkey. Their crime? Suspected links to Kurdish military groups. It's a classic Erdogan strategy. Liberally use terror charges to jail dissidents. In this case, journalists, lawyers and politicians are among those arrested, 126. The pro-Kurdish parties have questioned the timing of the arrests. They say the plan is to influence the election. And that is the biggest challenge in Turkey. When you rule for 20 years, you become the establishment. You become the rule book and the cop. And it's double the challenge for Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu. Why? Because he's calling for a complete dismantling of Erdogan's policies. He's deeply secular, he's pro-Europe, and he's pro-NATO. So if Erdogan loses this election, the impact will be felt beyond the borders of Turkey, in Brussels, in Washington, in London, and who knows, maybe even in New Delhi. Now it's time for Vantage Shots. Images that tell the story. Starting with Russia, 2 strategic missile carrier bombers flew over neutral waters for over 14 hours. Meanwhile, a fire broke out in the Ural mountains in Russia. Many residential buildings were destroyed. Efforts are on to douse the fire. In Morocco, the 37th edition of the Ultra Marathon kicked off in the Sahara Desert. And finally, what makes April the 26th significant? We are taking you back in history. On this day, the Chernobyl nuclear disaster took place. The year was 1986. The plant was located in erstwhile Soviet Union. It had 4 reactors. One of them was to be shut down for routine maintenance. The crew took this opportunity to conduct a test, which went out of control. There was a drastic surge of power. It led to a blast, which blew the roof of the reactor. This was the nuclear explosion that traumatized the world. Emergency crew and helicopters were deployed, but it was too late. At least 30 workers died due to severe radiation. Tens of thousands of people were evacuated. Today, these areas in Chernobyl have become a wasteland. The accident contaminated wide areas of Belarus, Russia, and Ukraine. This was the worst nuclear disaster in history. We leave you on that note. Thank you for watching. We'll see you tomorrow.
Тонн бора, доломита, свинца, сброшенные с вертолетов смертоносные жерлы реактора, право на ошибку.
Вот давай ты камень перед проходом самый большой.
Email exchanges from inside the BBC, they talk about the risk of violating Indian laws. It's easier to rake up the freedom of speech debate, but does it give anyone a free pass to knowingly violate the law? America supports India because it needs India's support in return. And India is working with the US because it suits India's interests. This is how geopolitics works. Last night, he diffused a crisis with his defense minister. But today, Netanyahu was confronted with a new problem. His cabinet seems to have rebelled against him. The UK is looking at the Indian subcontinent to fill its coffers. That India seems to be negotiating from a position of power, like a partner and not a former colony. The US and Russia are dangerously close to an armed conflict. This year, 2023, New Delhi will be the capital of global diplomacy. For a country as diverse as ours, with 88% of the population illiterate, it was a very big deal to write a constitution, and that too, the world's largest. Meanwhile, if we may, here's a Republic Day gift from India for the BBC. A list of suggestions for the BBC for their upcoming documentaries. Number 1, the Kohinoor and the colonial loot. Number 2, an outdated monarchy and unhealthy obsession with the royals. Number 3, racism in 2023. We're waiting.